Welcome to the Lake Forest Library on this most beautiful day of the year. I mean, what a week this has been. You know, we started the week off with the solar eclipse. Just this past Monday, we had a wonderful gathering here. We are just coming off of National Library Week, a week where we celebrate the work that libraries do and the work that the library staff do to serve communities like ours. And so it's really an honor and a pleasure for me on behalf of the library board and all the staff to welcome you today to this very interesting program that you'll be witnessing very soon. So rumor has it, I know some of you have had some parking challenges trying to get here. Our apologies. The word on the street is that Taylor Swift is around somewhere in the library. So, but thank you for bearing with all the wonderful things that happen in our community. So it's a great honor and a pleasure for me to welcome Jan Gibson, who is such a wonderful community advocate, resident, supporter, what have you. I mean, she has served in so many different roles in so many different community organizations, whether it's the Historic Preservation Foundation, the Friends of the Library, the Board of Trustees of the library, and the symphony and what have you. And, it's just such a joy to be working with Jan and the infectious enthusiasm and joy that she brings. I mean, she always has this twinkle in her eyes, and it's just a joy just to interact with her, anytime that, So this, the restoration of the Remisoff murals was completed sometime late March, and I want to publicly and most sincerely acknowledge the support of the Friends of the Lake Forest Library that wrote us that big check that you see to support the entire restoration. So can we please give the Friends of the Library a very big hand? And Jan's going to tell us many stories about about the murals themselves and some of the new stories that we're just beginning to uncover as, some of those layers of grime and dust that had accumulated in those murals were being peeled off. New images, new characters, new animals, birds, what have you, have all come to life. And she'll paint a wonderful portrait of not just the murals, the characters in the murals, but of the artist himself, who had such a storied career. So without any further ado, please welcome Jan Gibson.
Thank you so much, Ishwar. Welcome to the Tea and Scones at the Lake Forest Library with the restored Remisoff murals. I hope all of you got to see the murals as you came in and to see the vibrant colors that they are right now. Today, I'm going to give you 3 promises. First, even though we're covering a lot of Greek poets, I promise this will not be a Greek tragedy. Okay. Second, I was a former teacher and love to give quizzes, but there are no quizzes today unless you fall asleep, in which case, look out. And then also, I promise that you're going to have a lot of fun. If you have as much fun or half as much fun as I did in the research of this, you're going to have a great hour. And thank you for coming on such a gorgeous day. You could be out gardening, biking, walking, doing all these things. So please stay. I thank the library board for their leadership. I thank the Lake Forest Library staff that's been amazing. We have such an incredible staff here and all the work they did. They were the ones that came up with the idea. I thank Kate specifically, Jim, Joy, Heidi, Mandy, and we are so lucky to have them here, along with Ishwar. I thank the Friends of the Lake Forest Library for their generous donation to the library board for the restoration of these exquisite murals. Some of my colleagues made up a check that you see over on the other side of this screen, and actually we decided to add $10,000 to it, so it's $260,000 for the restoration of the murals in total. And they should last another 100 years, so no problem with that. This program will be in 3 parts. The first part is you're going to learn a little bit more about the library. Some of you already know this, and I see your faces and you know, but some may not. And you're going to know some of the people who had the vision and worked together to make what this library is. Second, you're going to learn about Nicolai Remisoff, who is amazing. I had no idea when I started that this was such an incredibly talented artist. He always signed his name in documents. And if it were asked what the profession was, he would say freelancer. And he's anything but a freelancer, okay? He is just exquisite. And then you'll also get a little more understanding about the Greeks and the Romans and the poets and writers of the antiquity in all of these panels. And hopefully everybody has a sheet of the 8 panels that are there. So at the end of this, please join Ishwar and me up in the rotunda, and we can specifically point out various things that you might like. Although the rotunda has an echo pattern in it that nobody's going to hear a thing, but we can at least try. So with that, let's move to our restored dome. The Lake Forest Board in the library put together, it was amazing. Remember all those years that we had the plastic covering the dome? Well, now we have this beautiful library with the dome, and it's been restored. The library was chartered. This is long before this library was built. It was chartered in 1898, July 4th, and the library books were in the second floor of the council chambers. So that's where it started. And then from there, some years later, we now have a contributing structure to the historic district, Lake Forest Historic District. We have 5 historic districts and national, and it's on the National Register, and it's also a local landmark. This library, this iconic building, whenever there was a survey, I have always gets in the high 90s in terms of everybody loves the library, and people use it, and the library is so accommodating to everyone. So it was a gift to the city, the people, actually, of Lake Forest, and it was dedicated in 1931. Our first story begins with John Shedd. I have a picture of him, and he and his wife, Mary, grew up in Alstead, New Hampshire. He moved to Chicago. He starts working for Marshall Field. You know his name, even though you might not know him, because of the Shedd Aquarium. And this is the Chicago Aquarium, certainly renowned. He moves up the ladder to be president and chairman of the board after Marshall Field died. He had 2 daughters, and their names are Helen Shedd Reed and Laura Shedd Schweppe. The house on the lower left is actually the Mrs. Kersey Coates Reed house. And it was Mrs. Kersey Coates Reed her husband was working also for Marshall Field. He passed away in 1929, very suddenly. And 2 years later, David Adler built this wonderful house on Lake Road, and I know many of you have driven past it. Some of you have been in the house. And so Mrs. Shedd Reed, Kersey Coates Reed, moved into this house with her children. The second daughter, Laura, and she marries banker Charles Schweppe. No relation to the beverage company, by the way. And John Shedd and Mary give the Schweppes a 25,000 square foot home on Mayflower for a wedding gift. It was called Mayflower Place. I've always called it Schweppe Estate. But anyway, it was a wedding gift in 1913. It was reported in the Chicago Tribune that this was their country home. And by the way, it had 11 bedrooms. Okay. This next slide I thought was interesting. John and Mary Shedd were very generous. He was a philanthropist at this time. They donated a library to their hometown in Alstead, New Hampshire. In a way, it's very similar to the way Andrew Carnegie did with other libraries around the country, donating certain libraries. So it was called the Shedd Porter Library for John Shedd and Mary Porter. And Shedd contributed 2,000 books to this library. Now in 2024, it has about 18,000 books. Alstead, New Hampshire is a very small town. in 1910, when the library was given, it had a population of 800. Now, it was a regional library, so it did check out books to people who lived in the area, but it was kind of a remote area in New Hampshire. Today's population in 2024 is only 1,800, so it's a small library. The library on the right, of course, is ours, and the Shedd sisters did the same thing for Lake Forest. They wanted to give back, and so they gave a library in 1931, donated in 1931, and since Mrs. Reed's husband had passed away, she and her sister gave this library to the city in memory of Kersey Coates Reed. I want you to notice the similarities. On the left-hand side, in the front facade, you see a dome at the Shedd Porter Library. You see a triangular pediment in front, and you see columns on either side of the door. On the right-hand side, in our library, you see a dome, you see a triangular pediment on the front, and you see that classical pilasters on either side of the door. On the left-hand side of the lower panel, you see the circulation desk in the Alstead Library, and you see columns in the background. In our library, you see the circulation desk, and you see pilasters, these black big things right there. So those are some of the similarities that I thought you might find interesting. The second part of this story, and this is very important, this is Alfred Hamel. You may have not heard of him. Alfred Hamel first was a Lake Forest Library president during 1931, so he's obviously significant here for our library. He was a bibliophile. He had a library of over 13,000 books in his personal library. He was involved with anything with art. He wrote poetry. He was the vice president of the Art Institute of Chicago, world-renowned art museum with the Burnham Library. He was president of the Newberry Library, also a world-renowned library. He was trustee of the Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, where anybody who is anybody is buried. And that cemetery is at the corner of Irving Park and Clark, I believe. He was a collector of calligraphy. He had the nation's best calligraphy collection. When he passes in 1953, his book collections go to the Art Institute, Burnham Library, several thousand books. They go to the Newberry Library, his calligraphy collection. They go to Lake Forest College. They mentioned 6,500 books went to the college. And Lake Forest Library received quite a few pieces of art. The Friends of the Lake Forest Library, last year, gave our library a grant to have the art collection appraised in 2023 by Leslie Hinman Appraisals for insurance purposes. We realized that we are now just shy of 7 figures in terms of the value of the art in this library. That's no small change. Much of the art was donated by Alfred Hamel. And the piece I have right here, it's in a private room in the library, and I know you can't see it. We'll take it up to the rotunda. But this is Remisoff did an etching of Mr. Hamel at some point in time, and that was then bequeathed to us, to the library, when he passed. The picture that you see, the oil that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, was also done by Remisoff a year before he passed. It was done by Remisoff of Hamel a year before he passed away. Alfred Hamel connected the Shedd sisters with architect Edwin Hill Clark, and eventually connected Remisoff with the sisters Anne Clark. He lived in a house called the Centaurs. It's on the corner of Illinois and Mayflower, and you can drive by it. The front faces Illinois, so you can sit out on Illinois and take a look down the L.A. You will see 2 centaurs, one on either side. They're made of bronze, and he also had a publishing company named that too. He had a new wing put on his house. It was redone by David Adler in 1917. He had a wing put on just for the library of his books. And then if you drive down Mayflower, I know you've all seen this too, you see a house with a tower. And that was also Alfred Hamel. He built this for his servants And then he had a study, it's 4 floors. He had a 4th floor study put in there. And I remember being a docent helping people through the house at one point. And there are Remisoff murals there in that study. And I actually took away one of the pictures to make this picture a little bit bigger. It's of the murals that aren't in the greatest shape, but they're of the zodiac, the theme, the zodiac, in this 4th floor study. And he would go and read and write poetry, and that's where he spent a lot of his time when he was here and not in the city. Our next person, the third part of the story, is Edwin Hill Clark, and he's from Chicago. And he's somebody you need to know because he went to Phillips Academy, he then went on to Yale. He thought he'd be a chemist because his family had a painting business. And so he was going to run the family painting business. He came back from school and developed lead poisoning. Not very good. So he ended up shifting careers and he became a fine architect. From 1912 to 1926, he built 7 different residences in Lake Forest, and they are all beautiful, and they're all different styles, from Mediterranean to Tudor, all different kinds of houses. He's known for his work at Plaza del Lago in Wilmette, in the upper right-hand corner, at very Mediterranean style, and also the Winnetka Village Hall, very Georgian. And he worked with his Shedd sisters to build structures for the Latin School of Chicago. So as the Latin School expanded, Edwin Hill Clark was asked by the Shedd sisters, it's all part of the same network, to build these buildings. In a letter dated March 2nd, 1931, from Edwin Hill Clark to Alfred Hamill, he talked about the library, the new library that was going to come up, being a Georgian-style building, fireproofing the Indiana limestone, memorial to Mr. Kersey Coates Reed, a vertical wood pilaster treatment for providing panels for future murals. He said the floor and circulation desk are going to be marble. The capacity is going to be for at least 100,000 volumes. Turns out it's about 120,000 here in the library. He talked about the walled-in outdoor court, the fireplaces with large windows reaching from the court to the plaster ceiling. The letters showed that they are planning murals right from the beginning, and that's something to be said. He also did a little thing like Brookfield Zoo, and he also, if you've been to the Art Institute, I made these big because I think they're so beautiful, the Thorne miniature rooms, and he really took part in that. He designed the James Thorne home on Broadsmoor in 1912. It was one of his first houses. Clark knew Mrs. Thorne, and he designed the miniature rooms with her. Now, she had collected a lot of the miniature pieces before that time. He knew Hamill since he designed the Thorne rooms at the Art Institute. The Thorne miniature rooms are about the size of a large bread box. They're about this size. So if you haven't been there, please go and take a look again because they are exquisite. And they're, of course, all detailed. And Clark is all about detail, too. The time that we are thinking about our library and murals, libraries across the country, big libraries, are using murals on their blank wall spaces. This picture from the Boston Public Library, taken last year, it was built in 1895 by prominent architect Charles McKim, who commissioned French muralist Pierre Chauvenet for murals to depict art, poetry, and science in the central staircase of the building. On the left, I had Paul Bergman take a picture of me. I'm in that picture, and I'm about this size, okay? It was just phenomenal. As soon as I went into the library, I had never been in the Boston Public Library before, and all I could say was Remisoff, my first word, because even though different colors, different size, there were the murals right there facing me, and they were beautiful. So anyway, I'm on the landing somewhere. Anyway, that's basically what we have here. The New York Public Library, and I didn't even get a picture of the Los Angeles Library, but the New York Public Library also made use of murals, and they still do if you're in there. I've never seen this library before. They did the same with the murals on the ceilings and also above the doors. There, even above some of the doors, you see murals. James Wall Finn, a graduate of École des Beaux-Arts, was commissioned. He was commissioned by the Tiffany Studios as well, and many people on Long Island. So people were having murals put in, whether it was a WPA project later on, or whether it was a local artist who loved to paint. These artists were in painting in libraries. And now, a major part of our story is Nicolai Remisoff. I want to introduce you to him. I had no idea he was as talented as he was until I started researching this. He had other names. He used the name, he went by Remisoff, which is a V ending rather than OFF. When he did his political cartoons, he went by Remy, R-E-M-I. You're going to see that if you start digging into him. And he went by Vasilev. Okay, I've only seen that once. He lived to be 88 years old. He lived a nice long life. He was born in 1887 in St. Petersburg. And his parents were already part of the theater, so he was born into the theater. Russians, as you know, love almost any form of the arts, including theater, especially ballet, ice skating, classical music, anything dealing with the arts. He married a Ukrainian woman named Sophie. She was a few years older than he was. He married her in 1914, so he hadn't finished school yet. They were married for 61 years until her death in 1973. He died in 75. They had one son, Leonid, and he lived, after they finally got out to Hollywood, Leonid then grew up and moved to San Diego until his death. Leonid's wife donated the Remisoff collection to the University of Southern California. And when I was researching this, I had no idea how many, they call them boxes, how many boxes that I had to dig into to find certain pictures and certain documents. So most of the collection of Remisoff is in the USC library. Remisoff graduated school, but he never had a drawing class. He never learned art. It's amazing to me. I mean, he had such talent. And yet he became a political cartoonist of all things. He knew how to draw faces. He had his own publication called the Satyricon. The Russian government does not love to be made fun of, okay? We know that today. You can imagine what they were like after the 1917 Russian Revolution. Remisoff's family, he barely got out of Russia. His family fled Russia, so here he's fleeing his own country. He becomes an expat, really wandering through Paris, New York, Chicago, and finally Hollywood. He became a very successful painter, muralist, cartoonist, set director, art designer, caricaturist, and he was extremely well-liked. He was well-liked by everybody he met and everybody he worked with. He had long relationships, business relationships, and friend relationships with people throughout his long life. And he was a creative perfectionist. He really was into details. I put this on the screen because when I found this cartoon, it's a political cartoon that has more than 30 people in it. His acerbic cartoons satirized the leading figures in Russia, the new figures in Russia. He was a master at drawing faces. There's a sample in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. I think I counted 33 people in this cartoon, and I really don't know who they are, but I know that there's somebody because they chased him, and it's no wonder he left Russia. On the right hand of the screen, I ran across a caricature of this man in a bat. The bat and his little legs are hanging there, and his little round body, round face. This is Nikita Baliev, whom he met in Paris. He's Russian. I finally found his picture and I found his bio. He actually was a vaudevillian, and he's had a very successful theater in Paris. It was called Chauve-souris, meaning the bat in French. So really the caricature of Mr. Baliev is really a kind picture. It's not condescending at all. He probably had this hanging in the theater because there he was as a bat, and his whole theater was named the Bat, of all things. But anyway, it was a very successful theater, and Remisoff created all of the art sets, the set designs, and some of the costumes for this theater. By the way, when Baliev passed away, they all moved to New York. When he passed away, his theater was so liked and he lived in the Queens, that 1,000 people turned up for his funeral. 1,000 people, that's a lot of people. So there was something about this man that drew Remisoff to like him, and he liked Remisoff. We're now in New York. Baliev said, I want to move the theater to New York. Remisoff said, fine, the family moved with him. And the U.S. was going through the roaring 20s. It was a hot time. Everybody was having fun. And Remisoff and the Russians were embraced by the New Yorkers. They loved it. The theater was a success from day one. And people wanted to know more about Russian culture. What they ate, what they drank, the caviar, the blini, the gypsy dancing, everything. So in addition to creating sets and costumes for Baliev's theater, Remisoff had some time to design covers, magazine covers for Vogue and Vanity Fair. And you see two of the covers on the left. His style is called Russian Vogue. He loved using colors. And on the left-hand side, you will see kind of a Russian, I think, with boots and wild costumes and instruments. And I don't know what was in the Vanity Fair at that point, but what a draw to see something that bright. The centerpiece reminded me almost of the musical Chicago, but it was very sleek and very, very sophisticated. You have somebody in a tuxedo. You actually are seeing the Chrysler building in the background, pointed top. Everything's colorful, rounded figures, fun, cosmopolitan, and chic. During this time, he met Elizabeth Arden. Some of you may know that she had a lovely spa salon, and we had one in Chicago for many years on Michigan Avenue. Her first one was in New York, and this didn't come in color, and I'm sure it was Riata's color. But she met him, and she said, would you design all of my salons and my bar, my bar here? So he put murals around the wall. He had a mirrored ceiling, and that was the first thing he did. Then he started designing every salon that she created. They had a good business relationship for 44 years, from 1922 to 66, when she passed away. The photo you see here is the Fifth Avenue apartment. Very chic at the time. So we get into, I made these photos as big as I could. Remisoff left Baliev and went to freelance for another club owner. It was called Club Petrushka. It was 5 floors tall, and he created murals on every single floor. They were all stylized, and the Russians were painted in blousy garb, boots. They were carrying tea, which really it wasn't tea, it was alcohol. And you can see alcohol bottles. On this one, if you really get down to it, you can see the alcohol bottles at the rear of the picture. Now, this is kind of during the Prohibition, okay? So this is kind of a speakeasy in here. 5 floors of this. I'm sure somebody was paid off in New York, don't you think? Anyway, it was very successful, and it drew patrons like Charlie Chaplin, George and Ira Gershwin, and Harpo Marx. There was gypsy entertainment, music, and liquor. A sign not shown here, but a sign on one of the walls said, in Russian acrylic, said, alcohol is not served here. Okay. Notice the strong colors, and which he was just a master of. Finally, he moved on to Chicago, and that's where we meet him. He began teaching set designs at the Art Institute immediately when he came here. He just got a job and he was teaching. This is where he met Alfred Hamill and Edwin L. Clark. He didn't like teaching. This was not his forte. He loved designing. And so eventually he became the project designer. This is where I had trouble finding some of these things. He was the project designer for the Sears building, their display, their project, basic pavilion, I should say, at the 1933 World's Fair, and that's the Century of Progress. He ran multiple Thanksgiving parades on State Street. He had a long-term relationship with Ruth Page. On the left, you see one of her front covers of her programs. He did all of her costumes. And she was, by the way, a noted ballerina, choreographer, and later ballet company owner. He designed 27 theater sets for her, and he also painted designs at the Art Institute. Amazing, isn't it? Hamill really liked him a lot, and everybody did. He just had that kind of personality. So he had him live at his home in Lake Forest while working on these murals at not only his own home in the tower, but also Lake Forest Library. He and his family had an apartment in Chicago at the time. After completing the murals in Hamill's home and the library, he painted a mural for the Graceland Cemetery Chapel. This chapel cost about $100,000, which was not cheap. It's arts and crafts. It's in the Graceland Cemetery. And apparently there was a kerfuffle. Apparently undertakers, they had 2 funerals. The undertakers and the ministers said after they saw this mural that was pretty somber, they said, "Oh, this is way too gloomy. This just doesn't work." So Hamill he was a master of politic. He was quoted in the paper, all kinds of things, and he just smoothed over it. And then eventually they took the murals off the wall. And he was on the board. Hamill was on the board of trustees at the time. So that kind of did it. Today, when you look at the interior of the chapel, there's nothing. It's just sconces, windows, and that's it. So that changed. During the depths of the Depression and following the Depression, Hollywood was a draw for many artists, many. And so that included Remisoff, and he had plenty of work to make a really good living, and he loved the glamour part of the nature of it. Remisoff went out to Hollywood and was either art director or production designer for 31 films, including Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, The Red Pony, as well as Ocean's 11, not the one with George Clooney, but the one with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack in the 1960 version. He used storyboards, I found out, for all of his movies, for anything he did. Storyboards are so, they're different sizes, but a lot of them are so big. And each scene would have a storyboard. He did these in colored pencils. So he drew these up. He had more than 500 storyboards for each movie. And that's why I'm wondering, I know that the Ocean's 11, Warner Brothers, who owned Ocean's 11, kept all of that with them. But I'm wondering if USC, if some of those storyboards didn't end up in USC's library. I don't know. He designed sets also for the first 2 years of Gunsmoke, very popular TV show at that time. He retired in 1965 and passed away 10 years later as a successful and very talented freelancer, as he called himself. And now, the final piece. This is about our restored Remisoff murals. This picture shows us entering the rotunda. So as you enter the rotunda, you see the circulation desk. Before we start moving around the room, at the back behind the desk is the 1931 Oscar Hansen designed Art Deco limestone overmantel. Big overmantel that's kind of white colored. It's with a bas-relief engraving honoring the memory of Kersey Coates Reed by his wife and sister-in-law. There is an archer holding a bow. The archer's face is a likeness of Mr. Reed. So when you go upstairs, look at the face and you're going to see Mr. Kersey Coates Reed's face, a likeness of it. Originally, the archer held an open book in the drawing, but this was replaced with a bow. The inscription reads, "In memory of Kersey Coates Reed, 1890 to 1929, who was much loved in Lake Forest, where he lived, and who he cared greatly for good books. This building has been erected." You'll see that engraved. Please look over the overmantel, toward the top. It's hard to see because the chandelier is in the way. There are 4 transitions that connect the panels together. This is one of them. And they are just, I consider them just hyphens connecting the mural. There are no people in these transitions, just landscapes. And you will see better when you visit the room, but you'll see even the landscape, the color will connect to the next mural on both sides. You'll see all kinds of things with that. Let's see, the panels are in the style of classical Greek vase painting, with Remisoff's spirit of the Byzantine Russian icons. The murals are colorful with very rounded figures. So we're going to start to the left. That's where Homer is. He's the most important panel in this room. And on the left, so if you start with the Homer panel, he's on the left. As we go around, the last one is panel 8, and that's Pythagoras on the right of the circulation desk. Okay, panel 1. I used to teach school, and I taught a lot of these characters, okay? And the kids, I taught this in high school, seniors, they loved reading Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, it was just, it entrances people from small children with all of those, Cyclops and Polyphemus and Circe and the Sirens and all that to adults. So it's very engaging. It's easy to read. The blind Greek poet Homer is credited as the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, 2 epic poems that are foundational works of ancient Greek literature. Homer lived around 800 BC. There was a Homer, okay? He didn't live before 850. Remember, we're going backwards. We're BC, we're early. So they figured that out. He was highly respected. Everything I've read about, he was highly respected by all other poets, especially who came after him. The definition of an epic poem is a lengthy narrative about extraordinary deeds of extraordinary characters who have flaws. There are always lots of themes in these things, love, hate, good versus evil, all kinds of things. Every civilization has a story equivalent to the Odyssey. As I was saying, every civilization has an Odyssey. In the United States, America has its own Odyssey, and that, you may not know it, but it's Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. That's our Odyssey here. But when I looked up India and China and Japan and all these other countries, they all have their own. And basically it's striving for something, it's achieving something, and it has those themes going all the way through. The Iliad focuses on the Trojan War and follows Achilles, one of the Greek heroes. The Trojan War lasted 10 years. The Odyssey is the Odysseus' trip home to Ithaca. He was king. It took Odysseus 10 years to get home from the Trojan War, and that means that he was gone for 20 years from his own home. The Iliad is written in they're all in lines, and so Iliad has 15,000 lines, just lines of poetry. The Odyssey is 13,000 lines. It's pretty long. Each poem is 24 books, but I think of a book as a chapter. There are other poets that have written a lot, but not quite as much as these two. Robert Fagles is from Princeton. He's written the definitive translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And it's easy to read, by the way. They're both easy. The other character we have in this scene is Pindar. And Pindar is sitting right by Homer. And he was the first Greek poet to reflect on the nature of poetry and the poet's role. His hero is Homer, and his work is largely unread. I never taught him. It's unread to the general public because the poetry seems difficult and very peculiar to read. It just hasn't been translated right, probably. There's one character, and we'll have a spoiler alert here. There's one character in this panel that you will see and not see. Since they've been cleaned, the panels have been cleaned, we now see a character at the back end, the rear of the panel, up high, and it's kind of in a blue color, kind of gray blue. Okay. We finally discovered it and authenticated it. It's way in the back, and he's tall. He has his hand up as he's directing. Okay. This is Alfred Hamill. This is the gentleman I told you about that actually got this whole thing together. His face is long, he has flat lips, he has strong cheekbones, and he doesn't want to be recognized. It's hard to find a picture of this man. And so he's very instrumental in making everything happen, making this library come to life. And there he is, even a little bit younger. You saw an older picture of him the year before he passed away, but that is he in this picture. So I thought you'd like to know that. Kind of neat, isn't it? Okay. The next, and some of these others are just characters. Okay, and they may be people from Lake Forest. Who knows? But we haven't drilled down that hard yet. The next panel is Sappho. You may have heard of her. She's the first woman poet, and she's known for her lyrical poetry, and she always has a lyre. That's a lyre harp. It's a stringed instrument, and she always has something like that nearby. She's not playing it, although Homer was playing the lyre harp, I believe, in the first panel. In ancient times, Sappho was widely regarded as one of the greatest lyric poets and was given names such as the 10th Muse and the Poetess. She wrote 10,000 lines, but only, and I don't know how they figured this out, only 650 of those lines survived. So you'll see papyrus and other things that have been written on, but she wrote a lot. She was prolific. She was from an aristocratic family, and she's associated with, it's called a barbitos, a deep-sounding lyre. It's a harp lyre. It's a stringed instrument. She wrote Ode to Aphrodite, and then we have also in this picture, to the right of her, in red, we have Theocritus. He was born in Syracuse, Sicily. He was Greek-born. So see, it's not Sicily, Italy. We're prior to where we started defining all kinds of areas. He was a creator of ancient Greek pastoral poetry, and idyls of shepherd life have been the models for all such poetry that he wrote. You see winged men in the distance. Well, Icarus was was a man with wings described in Virgil's Aeneid. So there are various pieces here, but it's all idyllic, it's all pastoral, it's all love, it's all music. Panel 3. Now we get into our Greek dramatic poets. We have a comedian, Aristophanes. He's dressed in a red robe, and he's kind of hard to miss. He's holding a smile, a face, the theater smile, and he's holding that. He wrote Lysistrata, The Wasp, The Birds, these humorous plays, and if ever you have a chance to go to an Aristophanes play, go. Nathan Lane, the comedian that you may have heard of, just finished on Broadway, I think, of The Wasps. So these are funny, dramatic but funny theater. We have 3 tragedians. We have Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides. Sophocles is standing. He has a very thick beard. He's on the left-hand side, and he wrote 120 plays. He wrote Electra. This is quite a tragedy. Oedipus Rex was pretty much a tragedy, and Antigone. They're all tragedies. Aeschylus is standing between Aristophanes and Sophocles, so he's in the middle. And he had about 7 of his plays survive. He wrote Prometheus Bound. It's a very famous play. And Euripides is seated in the front in white, and 18 plays survive from him, and he wrote a very famous play called Medea. Here we go to Virgil. Virgil is in a blue robe, and he's Roman. Now we're getting into a Roman poet rather than all these other people have been Greek. His epic poem is called the Aeneid. It's about social change in Rome with the fall of the Republic. He reintroduced moral values for Rome. His character, his hero, is Aeneas, he's the character, and he's going to lead a race of noble and courageous Roman citizens after the fall of Troy. And by the way, most high school students don't read the Aeneid. When I was a teacher, the SAT, you may have heard of that test that's given to high school kids, okay? It was given to high school seniors. The question they kept asking on that test, and I couldn't believe they kept asking it, was, who wrote the Aeneid? Well, what kid is going to know Virgil unless that child, that young person, was in a Latin class and they read that? Those are the only ones who are going to know that name. But it was kind of a trick question, I thought. Anyway, the other person in this panel, and thankfully, Peter Schoenman, who is he's a principal at Parma Conservation, who redid the murals. Peter said he was on a ladder. That you may have seen the lifts that were in the rotunda, and he was working on cleaning. And he said about 15 minutes into the cleaning, he kept saying, "I know this face," and the face is Remisoff. It's to the right, and that is Nicolai Remisoff right there. And you know, artists love to do self-portraits, okay? Right. They've had for years and years. So he put himself in, and Peter said about 15 minutes later, he said, "My goodness, I know this character." And sure enough, that's who it is, which I thought was really funny. There are lyres in the mural suggesting music being played around him, and the waning moon in this picture, there's a moon and way in the back, signifies the coming fall of the Republic. We're going to move to panel 5, and that's Cicero. I like this one because I like Cicero. He's in a beige robe. He's a Roman orator. He lived during the time of Julius Caesar. Maybe that's why I liked him, because I liked that period of time, Julius Caesar's dictatorship. After Caesar's death, Cicero became an enemy of Mark Antony and attacked him in a series of speeches. And Cicero was quite an orator, if you read any of the things that he's written. Mark Antony had spies follow him. So he had spies following all around Rome, and you can see a spy figure in the back in blue standing between the columns. And that Cicero was called an enemy of the state and was executed. His works were revived in the 18th century and is considered among the most influential in global culture. He said his political career was the most important achievement. He is the master of Latin prose, and we have him to thank for Latin being turned into something that is understandable. If you were taking Latin, people could actually understand it. The other person in here is Seneca. Seneca is kneeling to the right, and he is over in kind of he's really kneeling on the right side of the screen. He was born in Cordoba, Hispania, and that's in the Andalusian region now of Spain, so it's very southern. He's trained in Roman philosophy. He was Nero's tutor. He wrote tragedies, and he was also admired during the Renaissance for his morals. It's amazing how we revere morals, isn't it? We should. Anyway, next panel is Xenophon. Xenophon is standing. He's in the full armor, and he was a Greek military leader. He was the age of 30. He was in charge of the army. He wrote The Retreat of the 10,000. He wrote this, and Alexander the Great picked it up later, studied it, and conquered Babylon because of that. You will see military horses in the background and warriors supporting him. But it's odd because you also see Aesop in this picture. So you have war and then you have fables. Aesop is in the foreground, and he was author of fables. Well, he was not an author. He didn't write. He was a slave. He told fables like The Hare and the Tortoise, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, The Goose Who Laid the Golden Egg, and so forth. And all fables who were written at that time were attributed to Aesop. So there are lots of fables. He had no idea that they were there. But they were in the oral tradition, not the written tradition. The next screen is, Diogenes. Diogenes is the cynic, He's always shown by his famous tub. So you see a tub in the lower part of the screen around this man. And he was the founder of cynicism. He was not a very nice person, actually, at all. If you read about him, and you can go to the internet and read all about him, but Plato said of him, he's Socrates. He's very bright. He's a Socrates gone mad. So he was a strange man. Now we have the influential Greek philosophers, and we should, because they are incredible. They are the great thinkers of the world from the antiquity. We have Plato, a long beard in front, and he wrote the Republic. He details a wise society run by a philosopher. We have Socrates, who is snub-nosed, and he's in a red cape, and he's known for the Socratic method of questions and answers. He's a teacher of Plato, and he did not write one word. So Socrates didn't write anything down. You have Aristotle in a blue cape. He said the purpose and the ultimate goal in life is to achieve happiness. I like him. Okay. And then you have something that actually a lot of us didn't see until after the murals were cleaned. You have the Parthenon in the back. You take a look in your own drawing. It's now clearly defined, and it's in the top of the screen. And then the final panel is about math and science. You have Pythagoras, and you have him in front, tall. He was credited with mathematical and scientific discoveries, including the Pythagorean theorem. He divided the globe into 5 climatic zones, and he was a vegan and founded a school for both men and women living a communal life. You have Thales, who is in the foreground. He's kneeling. At 25 centuries ago, he was the one who divided the year up into 365 days. He used deductive reasoning, but thought the earth floated on water. He holds a scroll that says, "Know thyself." It's carved above the entrance of the famous temple of Apollo at Delphi, and he predicted, believe it or not, a solar eclipse in 585 BC. We just had one. He predicted one that far back. So those are our fellows. Those are our characters. And I wanted to thank you for your interest in Lake Forest Library. And please enjoy the newly restored murals. Thank you very much. And with that, we now have Q&A.
What year did he paint the murals in the library?
What year did Remisoff paint the murals? He painted them in 1932. Thank you.
What happened to the gloomy murals from
a question to ask about the gloomy murals in the Graceland Cemetery Chapel. Hamill danced a bit. He was he was politic. In the Tribune article that Tom Gleason found, he was just very subtle about all of this. He said, well, the board hasn't met yet about the murals. By the way, the murals were of men in black robes, and they were faces. And one of those faces initially was Hamill, but Hamill's face was changed to somebody else. So the gloomy murals did not do well with the undertakers, which I find strange, okay? But anyway, so Hamill then had those murals painted over. Yeah, pretty shortly after that. Yes?
Jan, did he leave any information as to who the characters were? He didn't have anything saying this is so-and-so,
Actually, the question is, did he leave any notes about who these characters were? I'm not sure. If you go back to USC, there are boxes, as I said, of information. It just goes on. And I didn't see anything. In Hamill's collection, that wasn't given here. I don't see that, but we can have our librarians on the subject of trying to track those down, because it was kind of tough tracking down who these people were. Yes?
Do you have any information about how they chose the particular characters who are in the panels?
However they were chosen, I thought they were chosen very well. Some of them had themes for the entire panel, and some didn't. For example, initially somebody said that panel with Aesop was a war panel. Well, Aesop had nothing to do with war. It was all fables and nice things, good versus bad. So some of them did and some of them didn't. And then also the fillers, I think Remisoff put fillers in, people in to kind of fill in. Now, as I said, they may be like foresters at the time. I mean, you never know. That's where you have to start looking at that genre, that age. So I don't know about that. Question?
Do you have any living relatives?
The latest I found out was Leonard and his wife Catherine. I don't know when Leonard died. Catherine lived on, also in San Diego, and she passed away. I found certain gravestones and other things, but I don't know if they had other children. So there may be children from that.
I'm just wondering if their family might have archives or something.
Well, apparently she had given everything. She just, but she had a garage full of stuff, you know, in terms of probably all the storyboards, whatever. They were all sifted out to the USC. Anyway, yes, Patty.
Is there any data reporting anywhere how long it took him to complete it?
No, and I was interested in that because I knew that Remisoff and his wife and child had an apartment in Chicago. I didn't know where, but they were there, and then Hamill got him up to Lake Forest, had him stay as a guest, not as a servant. No, he wasn't in the servants' quarters. He was in the guest. He was a guest room. So people were enamored with Russians at that time. He came, and he knew his talent. He had him come in, and he did the murals first, I think, and then he worked on the murals in his home, the Zodiac murals. And then he moved over to and maybe he was doing it at the same time. He sketched those first, though. I mean, I know that he sketched everything. This man did not just say, oh, well, maybe today I'll just put up, you know, Virgil. He didn't do that. He had everything lined out. So I don't know where that is. It may be around, it may not be around. And I don't know how long it took him to do that. I don't know whether it took him 6 months. He was a pretty, he worked in oil. And actually, when Parma comes, the conservation, Parma conservators, when they come to talk at some point, they may tell you about how long it would take somebody to do the oils. And the method, right. And they're going to come sometime, time hasn't been nailed down, but they'll come sometime and you'll get all the information how the process was done. And that's fascinating. Yes?
Do you know how much you got paid?
No, I don't know how much he got paid. He did well. He ended up in Palm Springs, retiring. And he associated with a lot of the people. As I said, he was really well liked. And he was very good. Well, you see, he was very good at what he did. So I don't know at the time what the fee was. It may be in some of our old archives. Maybe JJ can pull that out. Anyway, any other questions? Yes?
I was going to ask if he had any assistance through the WPA artist group, but if he had enough rich people knowing him, he didn't need it.
He didn't need it. There were WPAs. You know the Gorton was done by WPA. And a lot of other libraries were done by WPA later. He didn't need that. He was doing just fine. Yeah. Yes?
It says that he passed away in Palm Springs. Is he buried there? Do we know where he's buried?
Yes, he and his wife are both buried, I believe, in Palm Springs. I saw their grave markers, yes. Have some more tea and scones, and thank you for coming.